There are storm clouds ahead. Globalization is not just a channel to deliver higher growth and transform standards of living. Globalization is also the transmission channel for synchronized shocks. At times, we will find that the negatives outweigh the positives. Who would have thought that Greece, a member of the Eurozone, would have a worse credit rating than Pakistan? Who would have thought that the USA would lose its sacred AAA credit rating? 24 months into the financial crisis, who would have thought that the USA would face a persistently high unemployment rate of 9%, while China powers ahead with a persistently high growth rate of 9%? All these events point to major realignments that are fundamentally changing the character of the global economy and how it functions. As Mohamed El-Erian, CEO of PIMCO, said, "It is not just a crash, it is a new normal." Harvard professor Joseph Nye, in his book Future of Power, describes these realignments as two diffusions of power. The first being the diffusion of power from developed markets to emerging markets. The second, the diffusion of power from state to non-state actors. Let me explain the first. Many developed economies face problems rooted far below the surface, in their balance sheets and in the structure of their economies. Rather than deal with these structural problems, policymakers have preferred to kick the can down the road. As a result, these problems have festered and have become entrenched, raising the risk of contagion. Europe and the USA are facing this issue. In the meantime, emerging economies like Brazil, China, and Indonesia have hit the developmental breakout phase, going from strength to strength, seemingly decoupled from the troubles of the developed world. This two-tiered economy, where less mature countries are forging ahead and able to grow more sustainably than advanced countries, is new territory for the global marketplace. The transition will not be easy for all. Tony Blair, after the Beijing 2008 Olympics, said, "For centuries the power has resided in the West, with various European powers including the British Empire, and then in the 20th century the US. Now we will have to come to terms with a world in which the power is shared with the Far East. It will be a rather strange, possibly unnerving experience." Emerging economies are also driving a new wave of technological and policy innovation, at times leapfrogging developed nations, and achieving high levels of growth. Absent major disruptions, these realignments should continue. Advanced economies will take several years, some say 4 years to a decade, to fully rehabilitate their balance sheets and restore the conditions for growth and employment creation. Some will choose debt restructuring, others budget austerity. Either way, this process will exacerbate inequalities, morphing what was an economic issue to a socio-political issue. The USA, the anchor economy of the Anglo-Saxon global and economic financial systems, is engulfed in this. When its options to print money and inflate away its debt have run their full course and possibly found ineffective, it will also be forced into greater austerity amid noisy political bickering. The messier this transition, the more international standing the US loses, and the closer we will move to what political scientist Ian Bremmer calls the G0 world. This is a world of gridlock and stalemate, where no single power has the standing or capacity to make tough international decisions. As emerging countries continue to grow, they will push for greater representation in global institutions and global governance over domination in global fora by developed countries. Multilateral negotiations, global governance, international institutions will need to be more respectful of the growing strength of the emerging world. The diffusion of geopolitical and economic power, coupled with prolonged stagnation and societal pain, will discredit, and in the eyes of many, delegitimize globalization in the developed world. Who would have thought that a few US congressmen and a Tea Party movement would hold the President of the United States, both Republican and Democrat parties, and the world hostage during the recent US debt negotiations? Who would have expected the widespread riots and thefts in the UK? Who would have expected this year's troubled summer of riots that pit the wealthy old versus the indebted young in Europe? These movements are driven from the ground up and self-coordinated. This brings us to the second diffusion of power, from state to non-state actors. Let me explain. The increasing proliferation of mobile devices like Blackberries and iPhones facilitates flash mobs to quickly organize themselves around strong interests. This ability to hack the system allows non-state actors like citizens to coordinate pressure on policymakers. These flash mobs are here to stay and will change the way governments and businesses interact with their constituents and stakeholders. It is not all bad. Social media has enabled many grounds-up, self-organized, everyday citizens and entrepreneurs to do good and rebuild communities, as we witness in the wake of global disasters in Haiti, China, and Japan. We also see louder voices for economic equity, as seen in the tent protests of Tel Aviv, the NTPX chemical factory protests in Dalian, China, and the Anna Hazare anti-corruption protests in India. We saw some aspects of this mobilization in the recent general election in Singapore. For businesses too, social media can be a source of disruption of growth if well managed. Some companies have been savvy, but many others have been caught flat-footed. Governments will need to learn to share power with entrepreneurs and citizens. This is another new normal we will have to learn to live with. But there is more. There is another ongoing realignment that is harder to describe, and that is how technology will take on a life of its own. Let's start with technology's growing intelligence. On the game show Jeopardy! In February 2011, IBM computer Watson trounced two human competitors by answering correctly questions that required contextual understanding and language comprehension. This is the highest marker of human intelligence. Technologies are also growing more human. Today, voice and gesture-based commands are making interaction with machines more natural, and they will respond and react to us almost like humans. Futurist Bill Gibson has said how the future is already here but not evenly distributed. We can look to societies like Japan to catch a glimpse of what could be. Recently, a young Japanese man married the love of his life, a video game character named Nene Anegasaki, in a wedding ceremony with a real human priest. One of Japan's rising J-pop stars, Hatsune Miku, has amassed a legion of fans who sing along gustily as she sings live on stage at sold-out concerts. The difference is, Miku is a 3D hologram avatar, and her voice created with Yamaha's voice synthesizer. The love you have for your iPhone is just the beginning. Foresight husband and wife team Ayesha and Parag Khanna call this next stage human technology co-evolution. I don't think many of us have begun to grasp its implications. Is studying insane hours for years on end in medical school such a good idea when more than 75% of prostate cancer surgeries in the US today are robot-assisted? Do gamers and hackers have the ideal skill set to thrive in an economy that demands co-evolution? What about the worsening income inequality between those who can and cannot co-evolve? So, what does this all mean? As economic and social inequalities soar, societies will demand and put pressure on policymakers and corporations to deliver inclusive growth. This will be difficult to deliver. In the developed world, increasing austerity and declining public budgets would mean sharing, and in some cases simply offloading of the burden of delivering inclusive growth to corporations and citizens. In the emerging world, governments that still have the resources to remain active shapers of political and economic identity, like Singapore and China, will be rarer. And there will be governments that are at best absent and fail to provide adequate public services to deliver inclusive growth. At the same time, employees of major corporations like Facebook, Google, and Infosys today spend their days on campuses that are essentially complete full-service cities for their employees. In the near future, a corporate passport may afford a greater degree of freedom of mobility than national citizenship. The sustained high growth of emerging economies will drive a prolonged period of upward pressure on energy and commodity prices. Food, energy, water stresses will continue, and possibly increase, hitting the poorer segments of societies particularly hard. Climate change will drive countries closer to the extremes of desert and jungle, droughts and floods. But few societies have made preparations to be climate change ready. Income inequality will worsen between the climate change ready and the climate losers, pushing some to breaking point. Whether it is governments, corporations, citizens, or entrepreneurs that shape their society's response to the future, they all need to get better at innovation. This is not just R&D in the conventional sense, but also the ability to spot and quickly capture new opportunities which may present themselves precisely because of the higher levels of complexity we will experience. We are moving into an unusually fluid global economy where many assumed certainties we have lived with in living memory will instead become variables. The sooner we prepare for it, the greater the chance we are beneficiaries.